Now, Death Valley in the summer has always had an ominous tone to it, conjuring up images such as record-breaking heat and missing German tourists. But my family and I decided to use the opportunity to see and experience things not possible in the winter. We started by entering from the Big Pine entrance to the northwest. In the winter, we saw at least a couple cars enter from Big Pine, but in the summer, we didn't see anyone in 80 miles of driving between Big Pine and Ubehebe Crater. The road winds through some beautiful Joshua tree forests above the elevation of 4,000 feet, and I believe it's one of the best places to learn how to drive.
Turn it clockwise and let it go. That's it. Actually, just leave the brake and just slowly leave the clutch.
Slowly.
Change.
The road was freshly graded and we didn't really dip below 40 miles per hour until we hit Eureka Dunes. Now, because dunes height change with the wind patterns, it's difficult to measure, but many people say at 700 feet, Eureka Dunes are one of the tallest dunes in North America. Now, it's about 100 degrees, so we didn't hike up the dunes as we did in November when it's about 65. After seeing Eureka Dunes, we continued on Big Pine Road as the road snaked through some rocky and beautiful canyons towards Crankshaft Junction. Crankshaft Junction marks the intersection between the Death Valley Big Pine Road and smaller 4x4 roads which lead to Lida and Gold Point. Funnily enough, on our last trip, a man sold us gas in Gold Point out of a 1,000-gallon metal drum for a price that was cheaper than Panamint Springs and Furnace Creek. After this, we headed off to the Mahogany Flats campground at high elevation, where it would be much cooler for the evening. We continued past the beehive-shaped Wild Rose charcoal kilns and shifted into four-wheel drive as we hit the Mahogany Flats campground road.
Put it in 4x4. Turn off the LSD and put it in 4x4.
Is this it?
This is it.
Mahogany Flat Campground.
Unfortunately, after driven more than 80 miles on dirt roads up to 120 degrees Fahrenheit, we realized at the campground we are trolled by Gay-Lussac's law.
Looks a little bit low. 8 psi. And that's an L.
At the campsite, we put on a full-size spare and plugged the hole in the original tire.
Keep turning it.
After seeing us struggle with the bike pump, a fellow camper offered us his air compressor, which made filling up the tire a lot faster. That's emblematic of the kindness we saw in one of the most geographically inhospitable parts of the world. But while Mesquite, Emigrant, Wild Rose and Eureka campsites were all empty, we snagged the last site at Mahogany Flats. Apparently the place is very popular with astrophotographers who gave us a lot of helpful tips on how to shoot the comet, Neowise, as well as the Milky Way. You can see the two tails of the comet, the white dust tail and counterclockwise about 5 degrees the blue ion tail. The next morning we set off on the Telescope Peak hike. In summer the weather was perfect. It was about 70 to 80 degrees off a 13-mile hike. The blooming flowers were quite a surprise, as were the hornets we encountered on the trail. There were some ancient-looking bristlecone pines on the hike. Around Arcane Meadows, it ceases to feel like Death Valley and more starts to feel like Yosemite. At the highest point in the Panamint Range, the view from the top is exhilarating. For example, you can see the Hanopa Canyon Shorty's Well route to Telescope Peak, which has about 11,000 feet of gain starting below sea level. You can also look at Sentinel Peak and the Panamint Pass, which is crossing from Johnson Canyon to Panamint City. Far in the distance you can supposedly see Mount Whitney, though I wasn't able to identify which one it was. We saw some burros on the drive back, though not as many as we saw in Saline Valley 2 years ago.
Left. Overtake it.
Is it on?
Bye-bye, burro.
After spending a night in Furnace Creek, we headed off to the racetrack, passing through Ubehebe Crater and Teakettle Junction first.
Would bring a Tesla here.
This time I remembered intro thermodynamics, and before hitting the racetrack road we aired down to about 24 psi.
Look at that sign.
As we drove through more Joshua trees, we experienced our first Death Valley rain.
It's raining!
It's raining.
After some time, the Joshua trees on the side of the road ended as abruptly as they started.
Like what changes the map? Is it a minute changes in altitude? Now the road divides, Joshua trees are none.
In about 40 minutes, we hit Teakettle Junction, and unlike Crankshaft Junction, we were actually proud to hang something up here.
Yeah.
The road conditions deteriorated about 15-mile-per-hour washboards from Teakettle till we hit the racetrack at sunset. Right off the parking lot, we were greeted by a nasty surprise. What sort of arrogant, self-serving nincompoop would do donuts on the Racetrack Playa, defacing one of the most unique natural formations in the world? Nevertheless, we were able to get some excellent views of the famous sailing stones. Unlike in the winter when we went, in the summer we were the only people on the playa. High winds and freezing temperatures pushed these stones around the exceptionally flat Racetrack Playa at a couple of centimeters per minute. Over a length of 3 miles, the playa varies in elevation by only 1.5 inches, and these stones can leave trails up to a quarter-mile long. After sunset, we headed on to Homestake Dry Camp, where we were the only inhabitants aside from this bat. It was another great night for astrophotography, as there were not very many clouds.
Your light is making it very difficult for me to see.
Sorry.
After seeing some fun launch exposures, we set up our tent. Because it was only a 2-person tent, I slept in the truck. The early morning light really brought out the shadows in the racetrack, and we got better photos than the previous night. Trying to avoid the oppressive heat of the valley, we headed off to another high elevation destination, Chloride City and Rhyolite. Chloride City was an exciting drive, as we had to shift into 4 low and get out and spot a couple times.
Left or now?
Yeah. There's not very much left of Chloride City except for some mine shafts the Park Service has not covered up yet. We then went on to look for the cabin and grave of one James McKay. Now, James McKay was fully prepped out for 2020 pandemic work from home, as his mine shaft started inside his house. What was also strange is that while we did not have any data connection in Furnace Creek, there was a perfect 3 bars of T-Mobile data connection at Chloride City. These miners were obviously thinking about the future, when they build cell phone towers in addition to their mining facilities. The road from Chloride City to the Nevada state line must not be used very often, as we saw full, undisturbed anthills on the road as well as a large number of jackrabbits. There were some intriguing new modern art sculptures at Rhyolite's open-air museum. As the sun set, the setting was just right for a reenaction of a scene from Once Upon a Time in the West. We got some incredible Milky Way photography, but some light pollution from Beatty made it a bit harder. Of course, you can come to Death Valley in the summer and grab this one photo and leave, but you'd miss so much about the park, which is beautiful in the summer, such as the amazing and comfortable nighttime temperatures and the high altitude locations which are difficult to get to in the winter. For anyone looking for a particularly serene Death Valley trip, I would definitely suggest trying it in the summer.